Thanks for attending our panel today. I'm humbled to share the stage with Amy Weissberger, Nicole Beach, Steve Hallsey, and Nathan Block. So what are some of the key opportunities maybe that you're seeing more specifically for AI, and what are some of those use cases that maybe can help break down these barriers and limit the challenges to start developing and deploying these tools?
Reduction in email leads that are just, people tend to get to us from multiple different sources, right? And sometimes you have to fill out contact information to even get to us, which then generates an email out to our sites. And there's usually some, template that gets used to respond back. So using an AI tool or things like that to start to funnel those leads where you get a more qualified person who's got most of their questions answered by the time they get to the actual person who's going to work with them hand in hand is going to give you a more qualified lead. That's at least how we're starting with it.
Great. And does anyone have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of different things that the AI tool can do to help and assist. And as was mentioned in the last session, I think the labor shortage is a very, very key part of our decision-making process with AI and how we're utilizing it, from the way it's answering the emails to the way it's answering leasing questions to the way it's scheduling with our CRM tool. I think the danger with AI, as I see it, is you really have to understand your company's philosophy and what you're trying to accomplish as a company. We're very, very much about our ratings and review score. Luckily, we have won the award the last 2 years from a company in terms of our online reputation. I don't think that AI is going to replace the human engagement part. And so we're really wrestling of how do we marry these two things, the human touch and the AI tool, and how much leeway are we going to give the AI tool to perhaps disrupt that personal touch or that customer service. So that's why we're testing 4 different AIs, is to see how that engagement continues to evolve and how it's going to continue to evolve. But I think there's some real opportunities for real investigation into how that's going to interact.
Perfect. It actually bleeds into our next question, which is great, and that's about automating some of the more personal tasks like leasing, lead generation. So what are some strategies in place to keep that human touch or that human in the loop while moving towards things that are more automated?
I think what's key there when we're using this term human, I think it means so many different things. Like what the prior speaker mentioned, like you're interacting with a chat bot and you don't even realize it. So that experience, you think you're interacting with a human and you're not. And so what I personally think is like that human touch needs to be available when the customer needs it, right? It's gonna vary based on demographics. It's gonna vary based on how much information they're able to find out along in the process, and so it really depends. And I think just having the tools in place where they can get the answers when they need it 24 hours a day is really the key when it comes to human touch.
I don't disagree with that. I think the real issue is understanding where the marriage happens and making sure that it represents your company's philosophy, the way that it answers the questions, the way it's directing the process. And I've been in the business 38 years, and the one thing that I've learned is every time I add some sort of technology, is it begins to erode some of the basic fundamentals of how we're doing business. And I really try to stress that just because you're a leasing person and you're not answering the email doesn't mean you don't follow up and you don't do those things. It's like taking a telephone call that goes to the answering service. We begin to lose our telephone techniques when we are in person and we are on the telephone. And so it's really coming up with that philosophy of what your company is trying to do, how you're doing it. And it's not so much the implementation of technology. I think it's the execution of technology is the key element of success.
Yeah, I agree with what you both said. We're doing an interesting pilot So we know that, everybody talks about labor shortages and centralization and technology. Well, okay, so we said, what are we going to do about it? So we decided to test out a different CRM product than we were using, and with the idea that we were going to centralize a leasing team. And so we're piloting. It's 8 properties in New York. They are closely geographically related to each other, so there is that. But so we're piloting we went and we recruited people that we knew were really, really good at sales, just sales. And we let them work remotely. We're trying a CRM product that is prospect-centric, not property-centric. So these few leasing professionals are able to focus on the prospect, and it doesn't matter what property they're looking at. They can follow the lead, they can track everything, they can call people back, and they have visibility to see everything that's going on. So what we have found is that we're closing a lot more, and that the bulk of the people who are leasing before they don't even tour the property. They're leasing apartments because they're getting their answers. They're able to go online and see what they want to see, and then they can talk to an actual person. And our goal is that we're going to be able to centralize more and more from a leasing perspective while upping our customer service game and probably eliminating an expensive contact center.
Wow, some really interesting insights. So 24/7 coverage being important, and the marriage between AI and the human touch, execution being key, and visibility. Great. That's excellent. So I think now, Nate, I'll pose this one to you as we move along from AI and towards more emerging technologies in the session. Integration of these technologies can be one of the biggest challenges for these organizations, both for the tech stacks and for the operation systems themselves. From a technical standpoint, are you finding that new technologies are working well together, and what's your experience with that?
Yeah, I think that this part we talked a little bit about some shift into kind of how do you manage those solutions, not necessarily the AI experience of how do you communicate people once they're on property, what are the experiences that they're looking for. So one of the things we talk with a lot of folks about is kind of smart community solutions and what do those look like. So shifting gears a little bit of, as people are there, what are the technologies that they're looking for and how do they interact at those properties, and how do you automate those services to address some of the same problems, right? Whether it's operational efficiencies from remote locks and smart thermostats and leak detection. Those are all ways to use technology to really revolutionize what that resident experience is on property. And I think that one of the things we talk about in deployment is that there's a couple layers to that. There's a layer of the product. What's the lock, the thermostat, the leak detector, the light system that you're going to look at. There's a management platform from all the providers that help you centralize the management of those. But there's also a connectivity component, right? And so I think one of the trends that we see a lot in the industry is kind of this evaluation of a managed Wi-Fi platform. So we talk a lot about experiences, a lot about applications, but also need to think about infrastructure. And what's the infrastructure that you have at the property that really supports those kinds of experiences that you're looking to deploy?
That's great. Does anyone have anything to add to the Wi-Fi structure and some of the points that Nate's made?
I think it's more difficult when your property is reaching a level of obsolescence and you've put in technology that is not keeping up with the times. Luckily, in my current position, I don't have that issue because we're dealing with new properties 36 new properties I've got to lease up every year. I have to lease up 100% of my units every year, so it's very, very important. But the technology piece for me is a little bit different than maybe someone else.
Yeah, our properties are not new, to say the least. So from smart homes, retrofitting and making sure that we've got all of that. But with the Wi-Fi piece, I don't handle our Wi-Fi, so I asked the person who does, and she said to me, the biggest problem is where they put the boxes, right? Making sure that where they put it in the apartment homes is going to give the resident enough juice, I guess. That's that a technical term? The juice so that they can do what they need to do, and that the equipment itself, like when you sign a contract with the providers, is to make sure that that equipment becomes obsolete after a certain amount of time, and yet you sign these longer term contracts, so you're already outdated by the time that contract comes up.
Not us, we just sell them.
Part of the
We
strategy
just
in
sell
there
us.
for sure.
That's one strategy.
Excellent. So just dialing it back a little bit to what we talked about before. So integration of technology being a big challenge. What are the what's kind of red tape or roadblocks you're seeing in implementing some emerging technologies in your organizations today? Nicole, if you'd like to take this one.
I'll talk about that. I always laugh when I hear the word integration because that word means so many things. I have people put things on my desk all of the time like, hey, Nicole, we should look at this. This integrates with our property management software. And it's like, well, what does that mean? And so it's so important when you're looking at any type of, technology partner to really get the details of what that integration means because there's a connection, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get the data going back and forth in the ways that you want it to go back and forth. So when you're starting on that path and talking about the integrations, I also find that it's really important to make sure that you really have the cross-functional teams involved because there are a lot of times where you're overlooking or there's just unintentional consequences because you didn't involve the right people in the initial discussions and just making sure that when you're connecting, you can absolutely get the data and everything is flowing properly.
I was just going to say what you said about making sure that everybody's included in that conversation because inevitably you think you found something great, you put it out there and somebody calls you up and goes, you just broke this for me. And you're like, great, that was what I wanted to do. No, so I do think that communication is one of the biggest important pieces with any of this technology. There's so much coming at the site teams and involving not just, the corporate office departments that are involved, but making sure that the regional managers, that level, is involved before it gets to the site teams, because they really are the ones that day to day are dealing with the operators out on our properties. And when the regional managers buy into whatever it is whatever idea we've got next, and they can support their teams, it tends to go so much smoother than when we roll it out all at the same time to everybody. They need to have that heads up.
I think one of the biggest issues with integration also is the software systems or the basic software systems that you use for your management system and how adaptive that system is to taking on and integrating with all the smart ideas that are coming at us all the time. And I'm finding that some are more capable than others of integrating those programs into that information and really making sure that, number one, I thought it was very well talked about this morning, is that the integration, number one, you really need to understand what problem you're trying to solve with that sort of the software or the program that you're looking at implementing, and making sure that it is the right program to solve that solution, and then creating really good KPIs and measurements on how you're going to measure the success of that program and whether or not that truly does solve the issue that you were trying to solve. But integration, I think, is my biggest problem. Is I have a platform that is a little bit less adaptive for some of these new tools, and so I'm having to build different programs like separate BI tools to capture this information or to integrate these programs that we want to implement. Are you seeing the same, Nate?
Yeah, I would say that the other piece of that is just with how rapidly technology changes and how rapidly resident needs change, this idea of sort of being future-proof, right? Thinking that the thing I'm going to do today is the same thing I'm going to be doing 5 or 10 years from now is really challenging. So, you hear the term sometimes of future flexible, not future proof, but future flexible. How do I get the right core elements in place and sort of layer on top of that the other pieces that I need to do? So, I can build on there knowing that I need to adapt from what some of those specific end experiences are.
Totally agree.
Right, yeah, so, we've talked about a couple of issues, one being communication and telling the teams that are really, going to have to deal with this technology that's being implemented, getting their feedback, and then having it roll out smoothly. What about when you're evaluating some technology vendors? So in your process, when you're evaluating, which tools you're going to bring in, so is part of the big, I guess, concern, are we integrating too many different tools that are niche versus, this is a one-stop platform, this is more uniform, and then that is less pain point, I guess, to your point, Nate, about in the future, having to grow this. So, is that a concern as well? Is this too niche for me versus, is this really a one-stop shop for what we need to fix in the use case we have?
Yeah, I think Steve was spot on what he said, like, what problem are you trying to solve? I think you start there. What problem are you trying to solve, or what are you trying to, improve on, and really approach it that way. I also find that it's really helpful to journey map the process too, and make sure you're considering all of the items that are related, other technology systems you have in place, what impact it has on the other technology systems, because in some cases you could be creating an efficiency in this one particular area, but because the other technology systems weren't considered, then now you're creating more work on that end. So it's like when you're going to solve the problem, if you can just map out the entire experience from start to finish and think about the impacts along the way, that helps a lot.
Fantastic.
And I think if you don't have an innovation committee, or at least a group of people that are talking about innovation and the unintended consequences associated with each of these and the benefits that you're going to gain, I think it's very necessary to have that. I also think it's very important for your CIO to be a part of a larger group discussion with many CIOs across the platform, to make sure that we are talking about the same things and that we're not trying to recreate the wheel within Wood Partners or any other company in terms of understanding what this technology is doing to other companies and their success stories. And I also think as leaders, we need to have more of those kinds of conversations with our peers and starting peer groups and discussing those things, because you can certainly rid yourself of some of those unintended consequences if you're aware of what those unintended consequences could be. And I don't think we do as good a job as we possibly can or do.
I think you hit on a really good point earlier of trying a couple of different solutions, right? That at some point you can't really evaluate the solution until you've tried it out a little bit and seen how it worked within the greater construct of what you're trying to accomplish there. So that represents risk every time you're trying. You know that probably 3 of those you won't end up using, but really optimizing and being able to share that feedback with other people, I think that's really important.
I agree, and once again, we made a lot of mistakes early in my career. I would always beta test things on my best properties, and I learned that that's not the best way to evaluate the effectiveness of the product. It's to really put it with your average sort of property, your average performer, to really kind of dig in and see where the potential issues are, because the smart people find the solutions that may not be able to be duplicated anywhere else.
Right, and determining in advance how you're going to measure success.
Exactly.
So I think everybody here knows that technology is the competitive advantage, right? The use of technology is going to be the next competitive advantage in how you do it. And I think that the challenge becomes, yes, I agree that you have to say, like, what am I trying to improve or eliminate or, consolidate? I agree with all of that. But I think you also have to keep an open mind that there's all these products out there that are growing and developing. And so we're lucky enough that we can take a product that we don't know if we're really going to use it, or if we just want to test it out to see if we think that it's got legs for the future, and try it out. But we know that every time we do anything, it's an interruption to the site team's normal flows. So we try to be thoughtful about it. But I love the idea of testing for AI products.
Well, it's a lot of fun, especially when you're working with the vendors.
Yeah.
Nice. Great. So we have a question that's specific about actually the resident experience here. So can operational efficiencies through technology lead to improvements in the resident experience? And what's potentially one nice to have versus one must to compete for improving that resident experience? switching gears a little bit now to a more niche topic, I guess.
Can I start with that
Yeah,
one?
of course.
So I think we heard it earlier today. There's all these apps and there's all this technology out there, but getting a resident, I know they're going to expect to use multiple apps. I think we can all agree on that, maybe they're going to use an app to put in a work order that might be different than another app. But getting through a flow of something, I think is what the resident experience is going to look like. So from being able to not only unlock your apartment, but unlock the door for that food delivery, and then also maybe, send a message to other residents amongst yourselves and create conversations that way. I do see that. I see that as the next piece, and then tying that into some type of rewarding the residents for the behaviors that you want, all sort of tying into one piece. So I think it's meeting the residents where they want to be met and letting them create the community that they want to create, whether it be in person or virtually, but to get through the activities that they get through using less applications.
And leveraging technology, the thing that surprises me the most is we look for new solutions when many of the products that we already have, we're not leveraging to their full potential. And so really understanding what your partner can bring to the table and understanding how best to leverage that, I think, helps the resident experience. When we can't go in and we can't find the information to answer a resident's concern or issue, that really reflects poorly on our customer service and our reputation management. So just making sure that we are leveraging every piece of that technology before we ask for something new, I think is very critical in terms of that customer experience and really making sure that we're just not adding something for, the crow that pecks at the shiny pebble, that we're just not chasing those kinds of things.
It's a really great point that we're jumping too quickly from, novice or emerging technologies before we actually explore what's on the table. Do you have any specific examples that come to mind of tech that's actually being underutilized right now?
Absolutely. We looked at a number of different companies to give us a solution for purchasing from a national standpoint. We were being across the United States, it can be very, very difficult to get the right vendors and the right purchasing. We went out with a company. We didn't realize that our basic platform had a more robust platform for work orders and for customer service responses and those kinds of things, and we weren't leveraging that. We were out looking for the next best thing. And so just really going back and looking at what you're offered and how you can utilize that, I think is very important.
Does anyone else on the panel feel the way that Steve does as well, that there's maybe technology that's already been now through the front door, it's in your organizations, and there's a way to leverage it, and it's just not happening?
I mean, we use the same software for our property management software, our resident portal, and our CRM, because we deliberately made a decision that we wanted to try to single stack as much as we could, and including the screening piece of that. And what we're seeing is we always were like, oh, this piece, they're not that good at this piece of it, so we would look outside for an add-on. But what we're seeing is that they're developing pieces of their software that if we would just open our minds to it, right, because we're so used to having it been difficult for us to use before that we looked elsewhere, but they really are improving. And I think about our maintenance inspections, right? We were using another company to do our move-out inspections because our property management software we thought was difficult to get through the process. In fact, we knew it was because we tested it. But we went back to them, now it's been 5-6 years since we switched technologies to do that. And they said, well, we've got this new product that we've been developing. And so we said, all right, we'll try it. Why not, right? We'll pilot it. Well, it's proven to be, not only has it proven to be easy to use, which we thought was a shocker because we normally don't associate that with our property management software as being easy to use. We thought that the charges from the move-out flow directly into the ledgers. We saved a step of data entry and mistakes. And it also, it gives us more insight, and we're within our same system, and then we can do production schedules and all of that. And so to your point, it's true. Like the softwares that we've got in place today, if you go back to them and you tell them what you want, it's amazing how sometimes they actually listen and they work to develop it with you.
And I find, just really quickly, I know we have to move on, that sometimes your existing technology may not seem desirable because your process could be broken. So sometimes you just have to ask the question, why are we doing it this way? Can we pivot or make adjustments in these areas in order to, adopt more of that technology, your existing technology?
And I think that's a very important part, is that's why we try to find vendors that are very partnership related. I've been in the business long enough that I know that my time in this industry is limited, and I want to make sure that I'm dealing with people that I really like dealing with, that really has an understanding of my business model, that wants to work with me on finding solutions to meet my business model, and for me to understand their motivations for their product.
You're right about the processes and the things that we've put in place. We put something in place 10 years ago because somebody did something wrong once, and now we think that it still has to be done that way when it doesn't even make any sense anymore. So I wholeheartedly agree with you.
Really interesting. And Steve, I like what you said about design partnerships. I think being from a startup, I think that's the new wave of startups, is less selling and more design partnerships, designing together solutions that actually work and solve challenges.
Well, we had an opportunity of working with a company. We saw that we were getting a number of large packages across the United States about 7 years ago. We went to a company that was doing lockers and asked them if they would build us a system where we could create rooms to hold the packages instead of just lockers, because in July I don't need as many lockers as I put in, but in December I need a lot more lockers that I can't put in. And so working with a partner that truly understood how to solve that issue and wanting to work with us on building the package rooms was a huge, huge benefit for, I think, the industry in terms of how we're thinking through package delivery.
Great. So I'll transition now. We have a question regarding data, or data, however people say it. So how are you utilizing technical data to inform your decisions, and where are you getting that data from? So shifting gears now to talk a little bit about, I guess, what informs some of the decisions you make to optimize your operational processes.
Once again, I think that that's the key to it. And 4 years ago, we went out and really tried to find a system that was highly robust to keep all of this data and keep it in one place and put it in a format that we could build and develop. And so we went out and found a company that's doing that. What I found after we had implemented the program to capture the data was that many systems don't talk and don't integrate well. Using that word again, Nicole, understanding what that means, it doesn't work. And so really working with the vendors to understand how we get that data, our data, into this database, because having that information to make decisions, I think, is absolutely critical, and we've not had the visibility into some of these very critical pieces for a number of years.
Yeah, I mean, we have lots of different ways to get data. We use revenue management tools. We have our own, property management tools. But to pull it all together into a BI, a true BI with predictive analytics, is something that we're continuing to build out. Being able to pull in payroll information and training information, and in addition to, work orders and things like that, and then pull it into it where it makes sense to take action and actionable items, is, I think, where the future of BI is going. I don't think it's there yet.
I agree, because I'm not sure. I know in March of 2020, April 2020, I probably worked 20 hours a day trying to look at data, because the data we looked at prior to March 2020 was completely different than what we needed to look at during the pandemic, and it just proved that it was just so difficult to go get those data points and to get that predictive data to get an idea of who was going to pay rent, or all of those things. And I agree. I don't think BI is quite there yet. We find that utilizing a data warehouse and being able to manipulate the data how we want to manipulate it is really helpful, rather than relying on one of those out of the box tools.
Yeah, and getting that to integrate is so important because yes. At least you've got the data warehouse where you can put it into one place. I don't have that luxury, so I have to use a BI tool and then try to integrate all the information from all my vendors.
Mm-hmm.
Great, Nate, or anyone else on the panel, anything else to add about data?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I would really just agree with what everybody said, and I think, as a vendor, we look at that same level of partnership, right? And how do we think about what our solution is and the needs that we try and solve in there, but more importantly, understanding your problems, and how do we think about, how do we really solve against that instead of just selling the product that we have to sell? I think we have to be open to those modifications and thinking creatively about, I don't know, we were talking about data as one of the solutions was looking at Wi-Fi usage, and how do we look at some of those measurements that can be creative solutions in understanding how that may tie into resident satisfaction, how that may tie into renewals, and I think probably just echo what everybody said, that sometimes it's incumbent to have some creativity in that.
Yeah, I was explaining to Nate, we were chatting earlier, during the pandemic I was actually working in student housing, and we wanted to know how many people were actually still living at our property, and did they go home? And the first solution was go count the cars in the parking lot, because we had no way of getting that data. And then we started to think creatively. It's well, let's look at the Wi-Fi usage, let's look at the smart locks and things like that to kind of really give us the data, because the data may be out there in places that you're not even realizing.
Isn't it great in data too? Well, every time you see a piece or a snippet, it asks or demands 7 or 8 different questions.
Yes.
And that's what I love. I mean, that every piece that you get from a different vendor in terms of usage or those kinds of things, demands another 7 questions that you can build another card around in terms of your BI tool.
It's great. The feedback loop
Yeah.
is extremely
so
important.
important to us.
Yeah. It's actually,
especially now in terms of the pandemic. Once again, I apologize, but we're looking at how we're developing and building our new properties, and is a balcony that important now? And just looking at how often a resident goes out. So we've added infrared cameras in certain places to see how many people are going into different areas of the building. Can we reduce the size of our weight rooms because of that? Because now we have this capability to gather that kind of data, and it's changing our mindset in terms of amenities, sizes of units, access points to units, where we're putting the mail rooms, where we're putting some of these items, because now we have the data.
I think when you talk about resident experience, and all of it's anchored in connectivity, right? So every bit of what a resident wants to do when they're on property is connected to something, right? It's connected to the internet, it's connected to applications, it's connected to all those things. But one of the hidden benefits is exactly what you're looking at, right? If I use those smart technologies that have significant resident benefits, how do I get smarter about those things, to think about usage, and how do I build tools that layer on top of that to say, before I go down to the weight room, how do I see how many people are in there already to know if it's packed and I want to go back in half an hour? I think that layer of connectivity that oftentimes get anchored in how do I build this better resident experience also has all of these really significant operational benefits, but also really big insights that owners can use to modify strategy moving forward.
Absolutely. If I get it right, I get higher rent.
Great. So I think we have time to field one last question. So we're about a little over 2 weeks away from 2022. It's really exciting, and a great question to ask. We've talked now about currently what you're all doing in your organizations, but looking ahead to 2022. So what is the next big thing that you feel technology can offer for improving some of these operational efficiencies? And just in general, how positive is the outlook when it comes to emerging tech for the multifamily space moving into next year? Whoever wants to jump in.
I'll jump in. I think maintenance is the next big thing from a technology standpoint, hubbing maintenance into certain areas. I'm having a heck of a time finding good qualified techs and good qualified individuals. If there was a platform, and we're looking into this with one of our partners, of finding different ways where they can get notifications, travel times, those kinds of things, to hub maintenance and keep those kinds of things flowing. From a maintenance standpoint, I can't find maintenance people.
I was going to say maintenance. I think recruiting and training, onboarding, and making, it's a huge challenge in our industry. It's a huge challenge in I think every industry is the maintenance, finding qualified, or even not even qualified, but finding people who want to go into the field that we can then train. So there are platforms out there that, but it's more contracting out, and people can bid on jobs and go and do the work for you. But we're looking at solutions. I wish somebody could come up to me and say, hey, we've come up with this company where we're going to onboard all of your maintenance guys and we're going to go and recruit them all, because that's been a huge challenge.
Yeah, staffing, I think all around, we've talked about the staffing shortages there, and I know like a big push is, can we reduce FTE count based on any of, the technology initiatives? I think the resources are going to be reallocated, and so just kind of technology to help manage that. And Steve, I'm glad you solved this problem, because we're struggling with packages. I know there are a lot of solutions out there, but I'm yet to find one that, it's like, you ordered what online? And just, they're just filling the package.
You mean a set of 4 tires?
Yes.
The couch that gets delivered, right?
Yes.
Well, I'll stay in my lane a little bit more. I mean, I think that a lot of what we talk about here and how do we solve a lot of these problems is around connectivity. And I think that connectivity from a resident basis on how do we really redefine what connectivity means within a property. A lot of what has been deployed in the past has been sort of piecemeal solutions, right? The residents have their own individual services, the property may have a common area Wi-Fi, but the convergence of all of that lays a foundation for all of those things, right? If it's the smart technology that helps to alleviate some of the operational expenses because you can remotely rekey locks without having to send a technician out, if it's thermostats that can improve operational efficiency, if it's kind of powering all of these different experiences for residents, I think, from my side, from our side, we see the industry sort of adopting some different technologies and some different trends and how they want to connect everybody at the properties. And so I think that will be an area that all of that lays back to an infrastructure to say, hey, how do I have the right infrastructure to support all of these added experiences I want to provide?
That's great. And I think, just talking about the labor shortage a little bit, it seemed to be a big theme now on the panel and also in a few discussions today. So is that something you see maybe getting exacerbated as we continue in this pandemic into 2022? Is it something you see that will come out of maybe towards the end of next year? And is that affecting other strategic initiatives in your organization?
It is from our standpoint. We're a construction development and management company, so finding good construction people is getting very, very difficult, and that's not going to go away. I think that they will, in the economists that I have been talking to, believe that the labor will pick up by the second quarter of next year as some of these benefits burn off and some of these other. I think people have moved so often, thank God, because they're moving in our apartments, but they've moved now so often that they're now finding those jobs in those areas that they've moved to.
Any other points or anecdotes to add on to what Steve has said?
I think that training is not going to look the same as it did before the pandemic. I think the changes that were made to onboarding and continuing education for our employees is different. And I think more self-service and more on-demand for our employees is going to be the way of the future.
Great. Yeah, so I guess I'm not sure, James, if we have time for one more question, but
Yeah, we've always got time for a question for you guys. Yeah, so we do have one question from the audience. A reminder to everyone, if you do have questions for our great panelists, put in the Swap Card app. You can go into the session that you're in and then click live discussion. It's a little green button, and then we'll field the questions there. But one super interesting one from the audience: how does an owner's business model or portfolio size impact the way you think about new technology?
I think I'm the smallest portfolio here. It doesn't impact us the way that we think about the size of our company or what we're trying to provide. I think our focus has always been the resident and the customer, and so we're not going to carve our spend, our IT spend, to meet the size of the company. It's going to be to meet the demands of the resident.
I think we have more flexibility to test products in a sandbox environment and on properties because of our size.
Yeah, well, Morgan especially, I think every day I go onto LinkedIn and you just acquired a new massive portfolio. So you guys are working hard.
Yes.
Yes.
does anyone else want to field the question from the audience?
Any other questions? Okay. Well, thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today. Huge thank you to Aaron and Nate, Hyro and Dish, our sponsors today. Thrilled to have you guys all here. Thank you again.